So, welcome everyone to the Snide Show. I am your host, Corey, joined today with
Rye.
And Sam.
And this is another edition of Snide Cinema on the Tarantino classic known as Pulp Fiction, which my brother had never seen before.
I know. But what a solid movie.
Oh, yeah.
Just first reaction, solid flick.
That's awesome to hear. I'm glad you thought it was solid. I think it held up as well. I mean, one of my first things is sort of like it feels period, but I feel like it would have even felt that way at the time.
Truth. Because what year did the movie come out?
96, I want to say. Let me double check that. It could have been 94. Also, Jackrabbit Slim's not a real location.
What?
I did Google that.
What is
Wow.
there? Do we have something similar?
So apparently that was kind of a thing in the 90s. There was sort of this resurgence of like 50s, like Art Deco and stuff. But yeah, Pulp Fiction. If you don't know what Pulp Fiction is, just don't even listen to this. Just go to your HBO Max subscription that everyone should have by now and go see this 1994 classic.
Not a sponsor.
Still not sponsored. By
Yeah, it's still not sponsored by HBO Max. It would be nice. It would be nice. Yeah, so Vincent Vega, played by John Travolta, and Jules Winfield are hitmen with a penchant for philosophical discussions in this ultra-hip, multi-strand crime movie. Their storyline is interwoven with those of their boss, gangster Marcellus Wallace, his actress wife Mia, struggling boxer Butch Coolidge, master fixer Winston Wolfe, and a nervous pair of armed robbers Pumpkin and Honey Bunny. So I think they did a pretty good job of interwoven all of these stories that aren't really directly related. Because
Right.
if you notice, like, it opens up with that definition of pulp. Yeah, and it's a specific kind of genre of were they novels back in the day? They were like dime store novels that like had like little short stories, and that's where things like a lot of like The Spirit. Do you guys know what The Spirit is? It was this noir, kind of like sort of like in the same era and echelon as like The Green Hornet and things like that. So it was like, but he was like Batman copped a lot of shit from The Spirit. But it was like 1920s, 1930s dime store novels of just like this sort of like detective that with a supernatural, I don't even know, but he's the spirit. But yeah, Tarantino got a lot of influences from that. But I also make the note that it's sort of, I'm going to coin something here. It's postmodern, post-mobster. So it's showing sort of like the end of the 20th century, like kind of what mobster culture probably looks more like, you know. And of course it's very stylized, but Tarantino, he kind of did that good amalgamation thing like we talked about in The Matrix, where it's like he took different influences and kind of put them in a blender.
So, I mean, I think I would like to get into, I think a lot of those stories are actually very much like interconnected in a lot of ways as well. Like, but not in a direct like storyline kind of way. It's just the story that Tarantino is trying to tell.
Totally.
And I read some interesting stuff on it, some theories that some people had.
Okay.
But yeah, we can get into that when we're
getting
into the deeper stuff.
Sure, but yeah. The story more followed, almost more than anything else, was probably the briefcase.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but yeah, it's very anthological, where it switches main characters, and the timeline is different because obviously, Vincent dies at a certain point, and then he's in the next scene we're going back to before he died.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
it was like a foreshadowing.
I don't even know what you call it.
Right.
I don't even. It's sort of it's
like, hey, by the way,
it's just
Vincent
pulp.
dies,
It's just,
and then but we're gonna go back.
Yeah.
Why, but
Yeah, and there have been people that have put the movie together in like chronological order. Like you can find fan edits online, and it loses something. It loses something, and it's almost not as coherent as you'd think. You know, it almost feels like it's dragging at certain points. But yeah, so my next note though, just getting into more of sort of the sort of a different take on it. So there were kind of like these religious notes in it where you've got the miracle, right? And you've got the Bible verse, which and we'll get into more in a moment, but is made up. It's Ezekiel 25:17 isn't a real. He made
really?
that. He he kind of put a few different real scriptures together and like put them in a blender. And
wow.
So you could, I mean, you can do this with almost anything at a certain point, but you can look at this as almost as like a cinematic biblical story in a way. You have the Deus Ex Machina. You have sort of the characters that are coming from squalor. And I mean, you look at a lot of biblical characters. They're not exactly Rockefeller.
Right.
They're not speaking from a place of power. These vagabonds, these no-gooders. I mean, and there's a really interesting parallel here of like you're looking at two hitmen for a mob, an LA mob, and they're the protagonists of this story, and you look at like it could have easily been in a different setting and what have you, is like almost like Roman, the what was it, the Oculus whatever, I forget what they call them, but it's an interesting take on a story. Reservoir Dogs is the same thing. It's this post-mobster sort of like, this is what crime looks like now. This ain't Goodfellas or The Godfather or what have you. Also, I found it very interesting. There are all sorts of things like this throughout the movie, but I made mostly the note of this. They say Marcellus Wallace doesn't like getting fucked, but he does. They do a lot of that kind of shit where it's like this irony, and it's almost like the universe is teaching this character a lesson in a weird way. So it once again it kind of gets into sort of like it's a fable of sorts. It's a parable of like all of these characters succumbing to things like pride and envy and lust, and none of them really had a great time.
Yeah.
None of them had a great time with any of it. And then lastly, before we get on to sort of the bigger stuff, the soundtrack. Again, you mentioned it earlier,
amazing.
Sam. The soundtrack is just it's iconic. It's iconic. I mean, there's a reason Black Eyed Peas sampled that fucking surf rock at the beginning. Like,
oh man,
that is so
one of the legendary like you just hear it and all I think about is people on the waves. Like
that's
it.
Yeah.
That's iconic now.
It really is.
Almost more so than it is for Pulp Fiction at this point.
And maybe even more than it was at its time when that song came out in a weird way. It has been re-immortalized. Getting into sort of the bigger stuff. So the reason why there is the made up biblical verse, the made up cigarette brands, restaurants, movies, TV shows, is because this is a made up universe. This is a universe of ultraviolence, much like Grand Theft Auto. It is a pastiche of our real world. It's something else, long since been deemed the Tarantino verse.
I'm gonna have a hot take that will maybe challenge that a little bit.
Okay,
if we want to get to that, but
I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah.
Because there's the Tarantino verse, and then there's what they call on the internet the realer than real universe. Okay. So the Tarantino verse includes Django Unchained, The Hateful Eight, Inglourious Bastards, Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction. and that's pretty much it. And then there's the within the universe, sort of the movies within the movies. So you hear Mia Wallace mention the Fox Force 5, which was something she did a pilot for, where there are these 5 spies, and they it's like Charlie's Angels. And Kill Bill features one ex-spy who, in revenge, goes and assassinates all of her old, assassins she worked with, and it's theorized that this is a retooling of the Fox Force 5 or some sort of sequel, because Uma Thurman plays that character, the bride. They never mention her real name, and she mentions, that the spy had a certain name, and she mentions she describes the spies. She was there's the black one, the Asian one, so and you see these same characters the way they're described in the Kill Bill movies. So yeah, it's now it gets even weirder when and I get into this in a curation I wrote. So the Machete is based within
Trejo.
Mm-hmm. His role, it was a character that he and Robert Rodriguez had come up with years and years ago that they wanted to do for a long time. Robert Rodriguez made a set of children's movies called Spy Kids, in which there is an Uncle Machete.
Oh my
So
gosh,
technically,
right?
the Spy Kids movies are movies within the Tarantino universe, and you can do this with what's the other one he did with the vampire one. Oh, I can't remember what it's called, but Jackie Brown. There's all sorts of movies within that universe, within the universe.
Maybe that's Jackie Brown is where Jules goes after he quits the mob.
That has crossed my mind.
Right?
That has crossed my mind for sure.
Wow, that is so like I didn't really think about that all being connected.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, and it's all he's very similar. We were talking about Breaking Bad earlier, to Vince Gilligan, where his stuff is influenced by these settings and people. Not only the sort of like the fiction that he reads and stuff, but like Lance was based on a real drug dealer that Tarantino used to have. So he's also blending sort of just much like Vince Gilligan. He's attracted to sort of these dirty characters, and he likes to get into the squalor and kind of like use it as like inspiration. That's what Vince would do. Really, he'd hang out in trap houses to get inspiration for fucking Breaking Bad.
Wow, that's some dedication right there.
Yeah,
Damn.
a lot. Yeah, a dedication to the art for sure. And he also based certain things on like stuff that he would consume, and then like news media, news stories and stuff. So it's they're very much similar artists in that way. And this movie got a lot of flack for its glamorization of drugs.
I could see that for sure.
I could kind of see it, but
similar. Heard it somewhat like people say similar things about like
Breaking Bad for sure, for sure. It's inspired people, but a lot of the stuff that is in it is based on real tactics and stuff. So it's very interesting. It's almost like the serpent eating its own tail. That Ouroboros sort of thing. Sam made a good argument that no one should see this and want to do heroin. Like, I mean, it doesn't look like a good time.
Oh God, no.
Yeah. So
yeah,
not at all.
I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, looks like fun.
yeah.
She's like bleeding it out of her nose and everything. I'm like,
oh my
that's
God.
good.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah. It's a similar. There's been a similar sort of argument against sort of like the racism in a lot of Tarantino's movies, but again, one would argue none of it makes it seem like, oh, that's the way to be.
Right.
That's the way. That's the attitude to have. That's the thing to say. Like,
It's
no one
never
should
been polite.
Exactly. So if anything, it should do the opposite, which it did. Like when during Tarantino's cameo in this flick, there was sort of a vacuum in the room when he says that. That phrase.
Yeah.
No one should see that and be like, oh, that's the way to
That's
talk.
what it's supposed
Yeah,
to be.
Exactly.
Now that you mention that, like, who in the movie is the hero? There's no one really. None of them are good.
They're all bad
necessarily.
people. Yeah. The
Um,
closest thing would be Butch, right? But
I-
murdered a man in the ring because he wasn't expecting the punch because he was supposed to be pulling his throws.
I think
it's like
the argument can be made for Butch and Jules. And
Jules, yes. Jules, yes, but very much that redemption
redemption
rather
for both of
than
them.
yeah. For both, absolutely for both of them.
Yeah.
Again, going back to that biblical shit of like,
Mhm.
it's
Oh man, yeah, the biblical stuff is huge. That's what I was mostly reading. If we want to get into that,
absolutely.
I know, Sam, you had mentioned you had a rebuttal to the was it the Tarantino verse?
Yeah.
So,
can go
one
to-
last thing.
Sure.
Zed's dead.
That's huge.
Yeah. If
I-
anyone listens to dubstep, that's where it comes from.
It's so funny that in which everything could be connected. Going back to the Matrix. I had just revisited that Altered States mix.
Oh yeah,
last week.
Altered States. Yeah, that's
funny that we got into Zed's dead and then
yeah. That's such a good mix. Such a good mix.
Solid mix. I had to download SoundCloud again to listen to it because I couldn't
You can't find it anywhere else. Yeah,
Yeah.
those mixes they can't put them on Spotify. When it comes to Zed's dead mixes, my favorite is the classroom mix. The classroom mix. Classroom with a K. So it's
okay.
Dude, they do this. They do this mix between Kryptonite, that song Kryptonite,
Yeah.
and it bleeds into Eminem's Superman, and then it bleeds into Foo Fighters, right?
Whoa.
Keep you in the dark, I'll show you.
Wow.
Yeah. Pretender. Yeah.
Wow.
So, and it would, like Eminem, the whole song is like, I can be your Superman. He's trying to be this thing he can't be, Pretender. It's just, the whole mix is like that too. Each song kind of like bleeds into the next with like this crazy meaning.
That's
like,
genius.
It's
That's really
cinematic.
cool.
Yeah. Oh my God. The classroom mix. Yeah.
Mhm.
Once again, only on SoundCloud.
I'll have to listen to that.
Yeah. But so that was pretty much everything I got during the watch, and things I've read in the past. So I can't wait to hear your take, Sam.
All right. Yeah. So I'll go ahead and cite my source. I'm pulling what I got. What I got this was from philosophynow.org, an article called "Symbolism, Meaning, and Nihilism" in Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction by Mark Connard. A lot of interesting things. I have some things that maybe I'm questioning about what he said.
Okay.
But the really interesting part was this world of Pulp Fiction is a world where there is no God. That's the argument. That's what the point that they're trying. That it seems they're trying to make. So, you start off, you notice, no one actually is believing in God. No one there until Jules kind of towards the end, but that's his transformation.
Every other watch, I thought he was wearing a crucifix on his neck. It's a J.
For Jules.
Yeah. But they make it look like a crucifix.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's a point to your argument there.
And so they mention in this article, it comes from an old philosopher named Nietzsche. I forget his first name. Nietzsche.
Friedrich.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Friedrich Nietzsche. Yeah. Nietzsche has he had the idea of the Übermensch,
the Superman.
Superman.
Yes. Yeah.
And he also had a radical claim that God is dead, and by that he meant that God no longer is what is dictating our lives. We are no longer
the
following
concept.
that. Yeah. And it's other things, whatever that may be. In this movie, it's power. I also argue that it could be money, maybe private property.
Money and power.
But so Marcellus Wallace in this movie is God. You notice they're always asking, "Do you know who Marcellus Wallace is? I work for him." And as soon as they say that, everybody's like,
so he is in
now it's
L.A.
serious.
He's God in L.A.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and I mean, to everything, when Vincent is saving Mia.
Yes.
He's not doing it because he's a good person. He's not doing it because he's thinking about an afterlife. He's doing it because he's worried that Marcellus Wallace will kill him.
Ooh, yeah.
And that's how everybody operates. And similarly to how gods operate, Marcellus Wallace operates mysteriously. No one knows what happened to, like, why did he throw that guy off the balcony?
See, who knows?
Interesting.
He's playing with his toes. What is it? And similarly, because there is no God, there is no one to be the ultimate moral dictator besides Marcellus Wallace now.
Yeah.
And violence happens when it's okay with Marcellus Wallace, and that's it.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And let's see here. So Marcellus Wallace is God to everyone else. And then there are the people that challenge God, which would be Butch.
Yes.
Yeah. And some other people later on. Oh, right. They also, because there's no God, there's no morals. There's not that moral superpower or superior. They have that debate over whether or not rubbing somebody's toes is worthy of killing someone over. Basically, like that's what they're debating, because there's no one to say, like, there's no God to be like, yeah, you know, maybe we like, maybe not deserving of death for that. You know, whereas God would say there's all these other sins that maybe you'd be worthy of dying for, but not a foot rub. No. Marcellus Wallace decides it's a foot rub. He's God.
That's so interesting.
You also, so Jules, he kind of figures it out. Like, he has the divine intervention, and he starts to kind of piece, like, yeah, maybe there's like something bigger than this, some other morals that I could follow. Yeah. And he has those second and third interpretations of it, which I thought were really interesting. The third one was that he's the evil guy.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's where the power comes in, because he has the power.
Yeah, tyranny.
Yeah. And he is using it for evil.
Yeah.
And similarly, like, contrarily, the couple that's robbing the diner, they have no power. They're weak. They're not capable of being evil, because they don't have the power to actually do something evil. They're compared to what they're doing, they're nothing, you know, compared to what Marcellus Wallace does.
Oh, sure.
They're nothing.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
They mentioned just a liquor store, just something like super small.
But the movie starts out, they look like they're the bad guys, and you're like, oh, so this is who our heroes are about to run into eventually, you know? Right. But in reality, they have no real power.
And there are no heroes.
And so when Zed comes in,
I was waiting for you to get to that.
When he is fucking Marcellus Wallace, when he's raping him, he has usurped God's power. Zed is now God.
Yeah.
And it is, but he's a worse
going
guy.
back to, just want to point out real quick, Zed
is dead,
being the final letter of the alphabet.
Oh, right.
Alpha,
True.
Omega. He's Zed.
Ooh.
And that's where I think the Zed is dead part comes in, because God is dead, Zed is dead with
that's
Nietzsche.
So interesting. God again, Alpha, Omega, dead. Zed is dead. That's very fascinating.
Now, what is interesting to me, and this is where I have some questions, is like, so first off, because there is also no God, there's no moral authority. You notice there's no worry about police half the time.
Right. Which I always thought Zed was a cop, but I noticed this time he's just a security guard.
Exactly.
Officer. Yeah.
Yeah.
There isn't really, they talk a little bit about, like, be careful out, but there's no show of that authority.
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
Is there not one police officer in Pulp Fiction?
No.
Nope.
And I just remembered in Reservoir Dogs they talked about cops, but they never actually showed cops. So
it's weird that you notice later on they start to worry about the cops, and I'm not sure if that's maybe if that was a continuity error or if that was intentional, like maybe they're starting to realize
I think a lot
that
of
there's
what
other
you're talking
powers.
about is subtext.
Mhm.
It may not necessarily be the literal interpretation of the film, but yeah, I'm sure a lot of this crossed Tarantino's mind.
Definitely.
And he's much like myself is a plate spinner. So there's no way you can fit it all into one, but you want to do at least glimpses here and there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's fascinating. And now I'm thinking, going back to the briefcase, one of the biggest theories has always been that it is Marcellus Wallace's soul inside of that briefcase.
Oh, okay.
Because
that was going to be a question that I had, like if they ever get into what is in the briefcase.
Well, there's this, and there's one other big theory that I give weight to, and there's obviously like gold,
Right.
I don't know, but the one of it being his soul. The other pieces would be the 666 on the briefcase.
Whoa.
The I think the implication being that he sold his soul to the devil, but then somehow stole it back, which that would play heavy into that as well. And then the Band-Aid on the back of the neck. So Native Americans and the South Americans thought that devils could, the indigenous, the devils could they suck your soul out of the back of your neck.
Okay. Yeah, from like behind.
Yeah.
It's like up from behind.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the one and that could totally go back to this guy is so powerful that he even like skirted God or skirted the devil, and also Zed being some sort of like satanic figure is interesting. Zed and his lackey and the Gimp, it's very hellish.
Yeah,
like what they show is a very hellish portrayal, and
one thing about the briefcase that the article mentioned, what the guy says is that he says, to him, it doesn't matter what is in the briefcase.
Yeah, it's totally
like
MacGuffin.
and maybe that's what the story is trying to like tell everyone. Doesn't matter what's in the briefcase, but Marcellus Wallace wants it, and he's God, and he demands it. You follow him.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter otherwise.
It's a totem.
Mm-hmm.
It's a totem.
Mm-hmm. And sorry, go ahead.
So were we saying? So is it Marcellus's soul?
Yeah, it's supposedly.
That's another interesting one, though.
The other big, because going back to different influences that Tarantino's taking from, I can't remember what it's called, but in the 1950s, I want to say, there was a film. Let me look it up here because I want to be proper. I can't find it, but there was a film apparently where there were characters scrambling for a briefcase that had a nuke in it, and they did a similar effect where they opened the briefcase from behind and it was like gold, or it was black and white film, so it was like light spilling out on the characters and them all looking like, whoa, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's really interesting too.
Could be a nuke.
Like now you have all the power in the world. Like back then when it was black and white.
Yeah.
Nukes were seen as like, oh, you got a nuke, all right, you're the most powerful thing in the world now.
Yeah. It's back then with the Cold War scares and everything. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to Fallout.
Yeah.
We talk about Fallout off mic. Yeah. So those are the two big theories: is that it's a soul, or that he's copping from that movie, and that it's like the same thing, and it's some nuke. But would a nuke have that
briefcase from the apartment, right? Is where they got.
Well, those guys had stole it from Marcellus. It was in some sort of transit, like it was. They were supposed to be delivering it somewhere, and instead were keeping it for themselves because they were some little rats. And man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, going to Butch's watch.
Yeah.
The interesting thing that the guy in the article brings up is so going back to how there is no God, no one's following any path. It's all nihilistic.
Yes. Yeah.
And so Butch, he has this watch that his family had when passed down what his grandfather and his father when they were in war. And they were in war. They were warriors. They had a code that they followed.
Yeah.
And so him having that watch is him having a code to follow.
It's like Samson's hair.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Samson's hair. Yeah. He disavowed both the code and the watch, and there was punishment.
Yeah.
That's
like it's so like
symbolic
and
biblical, man.
Yeah.
I mean,
and
like that's biblical shit.
Where he's like losing his mind over not having the watch, and he's like screaming at his girlfriend, wife, fiance, whatever it might be.
Fabienne.
That's the funny part is he has a moment there that I noticed where he starts apologizing because he's like, I should have told you how important it was to me.
Yeah.
But because everyone is nihilistic, she probably wouldn't have even understood. She's like, oh, you have something that you value like that? Like you have a code, like something that brings you a code of ethics?
Yeah.
That's why nobody understood Christianity, religion, or anything like that as well until Jules got it. They were like, what? Why are you getting all like this?
Yeah.
Like,
and, the more I think about, like, the biblical passage and it being this made-up thing, I mean, obviously, whether we're going with sort of the nihilistic world or the Tarantino verse, either way, this biblical passage isn't real. And he says I don't even think he even says it is a biblical passage. So could it be that this passage was, there was a Bible of some form, not exactly like ours in our universe, but it existed at some point in the distant past. It's very forgotten, but it was passed down to him somehow. And he says, I never even thought about what it meant. I just recite it. And so
that's part of the nihilistic as well.
It's
part.
Lost.
He's just saying this. It doesn't actually mean anything because he doesn't follow any kind of this code. He doesn't follow these words.
It was just a cold thing to say to a motherfucker before popping a cap in their head.
Yep. Exactly.
Which is, I guess that calls back to it not being a real Bible verse.
Sure.
And your postmodern take on it is where I get the private property part. And I think, because I was thinking, like, what is Zed? Who is above? Like, if Marcellus Wallace is God, who's above God, or who is taking over God? Like, and you think about it, Marcellus Wallace is a mobster, so he goes and he takes things that don't belong to him. Yes. He steals property. Yeah. So what keeps people from being able to do that? Private property and private property laws, particularly. And you have a couple of times where you have, first of all, Jimmy, who says, I don't keep dead bodies in my house. And you have even the other guy, Zed's friend, with a shotgun at the start. He's like, this does not happen in my place of business.
My place of business.
Yeah.
Wow,
yeah. And that's where, like, the private property takes over God. And then you have everybody doing everything for money as well, and nothing else.
Nothing else, yeah. It really is. It becomes more and more obvious to me, not only stylistically, but just in this DNA, how much of an influence this was on Grand Theft Auto.
Oh yeah,
this movie came out in
94, so there may have been GTA 1, but
I think that was like probably like 99. That
let me look that up, because I remember the first one. It was basically like the map in the later
like 2D,
ones,
right?
Yeah,
like you couldn't actually
look at GTA.
Going back to the Tarantino verse, though, I was thinking about the katana that Butch grabs at the end.
Yes,
with Kill Bill.
Very Kill Bill.
I was like,
97. So so those motherfuckers, those Rockstar motherfuckers, were probably Chief and Blunts in video game school, like watching Tarantino and be like, this needs to be a video game. This nihilistic world.
Where these cops don't actually matter.
Right. Yeah, it's funny that that they came up like with a game. I was like, they need to come up with a show, but I guess that's kind of Breaking Bad-ish.
Breaking Bad-ish, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
But,
very much in that the world of ultra violence is what I've always thought of it as. It's just this world of, you know, you can put Clockwork Orange over there, just that world of just turn your stomach, you know, just the darkest shit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, train wrecks, man. I remember the Breaking Bad days. It'd be like you get through an episode, it almost felt like meth because the episodes go so fast, and you're like, wait, how did I lose?
That was not 45 minutes.
Yeah, that was not 45 minutes
Right.
at all.
Oh yeah, man. I can still watch that show all the way through and be like, wow, I see something that I missed.
Yeah,
Like,
man.
have you both have seen the show all the way through?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So there's like the part where, of course, you know, the kid that gets shot on the motorbike after he sees them rob the train.
Yeah, the tarantula kid.
The beginning of that episode, I think it's that episode where he rides through the desert and he finds the tarantula and he picks it up and puts it in the jar. Right at the end, right before that scene is about to cut, you hear a train horn.
Yep.
And that's like, and I was just like, oh,
yeah,
like all the, you know,
so
just the
much
tiny
of that.
details
So
like that.
much of
I was
that.
like, oh,
yeah,
crap.
yeah. That there's a timeline that does not crack. There isn't a wrinkle in that timeline that of that show. Like, yeah, Vince, man, Vince.
Yeah.
Genius.
Yeah.
Tarantino as well, man. I mean,
Yes.
yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Killing it.
Also, just Samuel L. Jackson. Bad
Bad
my
motherfucker.
goodness.
Literally. This movie is just, you know, I mean, I need to see some movies with Samuel L. Jackson before Pulp Fiction, just to see how much changed during that performance and afterwards. Like, was he casted for this part specifically because he had this range, or did he explore that range by doing this movie and then was like, oh, this is a cash cow. Yeah, this.
Yeah.
If I just keep yelling at people, they're gonna keep giving me money.
Was Pulp Fiction the movie that made him the motherfucker guy? Like,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
who, like you. There's no one else who's got motherfucker. He owns that word. He owns that phrase now.
Which
you know?
came first, the mother-fucker or the Samuel L. Jackson?
Yeah, exactly. He owns that phrase now.
So in like the Tarantino verse, is Pulp Fiction, is that before Reservoir Dogs?
It's after. Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question because I almost forgot. Vincent Vega is cousins with the dude, the gasoline guy in Reservoir Dogs. And they're a part of the same crime families.
Whoa.
Which is why they wear the suits like that. It's like a trademark of this LA crime family. That's, you know, it's like the black gang and like the Italian gang kind of like have like partnered to take over LA. Yeah. It's kind of, you know, again, it's not like specifically said, but that's kind of the implication. But yeah, they're both Vegas. They're both Vega cousins. And there's a bunch of little things like that I'm not going to get into. But it's it's one of those universes, you know, of course, like the same actors playing different people. It doesn't matter. It's, you know, they're all kind of like their own self-contained stories. But, you know, you could argue that the events, have you seen Inglourious Bastards?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
The events that happen in that are why there is this deep appreciation for ultraviolence and media because of what happened in a theater.
Wow.
That's why everyone's always talking about pop culture and shit, and why it became the new religion in American culture.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
Yeah. You got to see Inglourious Bastards.
I have not
That
seen
maybe
it,
that'll
so
be next.
Yeah.
But
The article that I was looking at, once again, he mentioned that the reason they talk so much about pulp culture,
yeah, I mean,
is because they have nothing else. Like it's just boring small talk that, you know, what else they gonna talk about? That's kind of.
I really think that his shit could fit in with this shit, like in a way.
It's a theory to look at probably all of Tarantino's movies, to a certain extent.
Yeah. But much like The Matrix, we'll come back to Tarantino eventually, but we got some other things on the docket. Did you guys have anything else?
Nah, man.
That was about it for that one.
All right.
Just don't say what, motherfucker.
So one more time.
Stay bad and stay snide.